Hey everybody, Dave Hagan. Today we're going to talk about catching fire again. That's today on the Financial Wellness Podcast.
Welcome to the Financial Wellness Podcast, Dave's weekly message to keep you on your path to the financial success. Here is your host, financial problem solver and talk show host, Dave Hagan.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the Financial Wellness Podcast. As always, we're coming to you from beautiful downtown Van Nuys. As always, with me today, Mr. Brian Reed.
How's it going, Dave?
I'm doing good. You?
Hanging in there.
You ready to catch fire again?
I am on fire.
So last year we talked about the FIRE movement, and I think we talked about it maybe 2 episodes. And for those of you that didn't listen to those podcasts, go back and listen. I know we did a couple of them, and I thought they were really interesting. In fact, in one of the podcasts, we were talking about a fella who was 28 years old and had $1 million in the bank. So for those of you that didn't listen or you're not going to go back, I'll just fill you in. FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And there's a whole group of people out there that are wanting to retire early. They're denying themselves a lot of things or living extremely frugally during the first part of their life so that they can retire early. And I was thinking about this concept again just the last couple of weeks. I was looking around the website Business Insider, and they were talking about it and putting together some steps on how somebody might go about pursuing this FIRE path. And it caused me to think that one of the things we didn't do last year was talk specifically about how to go about doing it. What are the steps, if you will? I think you and I, Brian, were just so blown away that people were actually doing this that we didn't talk about steps.
Yeah, that's living on ramen by choice.
So I want to talk about some steps. Retiring early is really pretty easy. You just have to aim to have about 25, maybe 30 times your estimated annual expenses saved or invested. And then to achieve that target number, that 25 to 35 times, you need to live below your means, increase your income, eliminate debt, and max out your retirement accounts. I mean, really, that's it. It's like
easier said than done.
Oh, well,
obviously.
I know. It's like the financial podcast. It's all about eliminate debt, live on less than your income, save that, and be financially independent. I mean, there's a lot more to it, but that's pretty simple when you think
get down to it. Yeah.
When you get down to it, that's the basics. So, what I want to do is spend some time talking about the steps that I think you need to go through to retire early, to pursue this FIRE path. And the number one thing that you need to do is you need to define early retirement. So for some people, it means being completely financially independent. By that, I mean not doing anything and being able to live on the interest or growth off of your investments. For a lot of people, that's what retirement means. But maybe you have a different definition of retirement. Maybe you want to leave your 9-to-5er and do something that's more creative, or you want to do something that where you're working for yourself, or you just want to work part-time or do something where you can make your own hours. Perhaps you want to focus on hobbies or pursue things that maybe are not directed primarily or solely at producing income. Or maybe you want to work in spurts, or maybe you want to travel in between those working spurts. But you need to think about what you want to define as retirement for you, or to be financially independent. What does that look like at that stage of your life. And once you have a better idea what that early retirement phase looks like, well, then you can start to plan for it. But I think it would differ from person to person. I don't know. For me, I don't think sitting around and just living off of interest or growth on investments would be a whole lot of fun. How about you, Brian?
Oh, I don't think they're not doing anything with their time, but they're going to be contributing in some other way. So, I mean, again, there's a lot that has to go into all of this, and defining it early is, one of the steps.
Sure. I think thinking about it, defining it, and really getting honest and real with yourself. It used to be retirement, which was at about 65, was when your body was so burned up that you really couldn't go into work. You really couldn't, pick up the shovel or go into the mines or do whatever you needed to do. And retirement meant, all right, you can't do that anymore, and now you've got a few years before you pass to sit around and do what you want. I don't think that's the case at all anymore. I think that, well, first of all, 65 is nothing. That's, a lot of people could do 65 standing on their head in a puddle of water. That's not that difficult. People are going to live a lot longer than that. And secondly, I think people that are looking at that phase of their life are saying, yeah, I don't want to just like go on cruises. I don't want to just sit around and watch Jeopardy. That time of my life is where I can do something different, perhaps. Maybe something that doesn't pay as much, maybe something that doesn't have a big cushy pension or an equity piece or something like that.
I don't think it's not about never working. It's just not having to work.
Having to work? Okay.
Not having to work.
Yeah, okay. Although I suppose, what's that old saying? Love what you do and you never have to work a day in your life. And that's a great lifestyle. I use my father-in-law as an example. If he didn't have to get up and if he won the lottery and didn't have to get up and work, and I don't know that he needs to get up and work anymore, but if he won the lottery, what would he do? He'd get up and go to his shop. He'd get up and go to work because he digs it. It's just like fun to him. So that's kind of nice. So step number 1, define what this retirement era is going to look like in your life. Step 2, you need to take inventory. First, you should calculate your net worth. And that's not too difficult. That's assets minus liabilities. I think you could sit down at home with a piece of paper and just a few minutes, relatively few minutes, list out what you own and about what it's worth. It doesn't have to be precise. And then deduct from that the liabilities. That's going to give you your net worth. I think you need to know that if you're going to start putting together a FIRE plan. Secondly, you need to calculate or have some idea what your annual spending is, or my wife calls this the spend, but you need to know what it is. And you can get a guesstimate based upon your credit card statements or your checking account. Now here again, you've got to be real honest with yourself, because if it's not based upon your checking account statements, you're going to miss some of the stuff that you spend money on, like the coffee, like the gifts, like the travel, that kind of stuff. But once you know that, and once you know your net worth, then you're in a position to move on to the third step, which would be to establish your target number. And remember, that target number that you need to have is 25, maybe 30 times your expected annual expenses. What you've put together that's growing, and you're going to live on the growth, or you are going to live on the income. And a lot of people will say, yeah, maybe it's also a good idea to have a year's worth of expenses in cash. But if you've got 25, certainly 30 in investments, and it's yielding some income, and that's enough to to take care of your annual expenses, well, that's your target. That's your target number. Fourth step, you got to live below your means to get to your target number. There's just no other way around it. You can't build substantial long-term wealth if you spend more than you earn. I guess unless you're the U.S. government, but they can print money, so I guess it's different, right? But that's about as basic as it can get. And like I said earlier, that's a tenet of the TFWP. We need to spend less than we make. But if you're going to be a fire person, you need to do it more aggressively. And I'm not talking about, ramen. I'm not talking about living in a shack, Well, some of these people are. Yeah, I mean, some of these fire people are pretty crazy about this. But I think that you can look at trimming the spend so that your target number is smaller so that it can be attained sooner. So, I mean, this is kind of a mathematical calculation if you look at it, but there are a few variables in this that you can move around to get where you want to be. You might choose to not buy that new car when the purchase is up, or when it's wearing out. Find a way to make that old dog slink around the streets a few years longer. Or you might find that you enjoy eating at home and making good food rather than eating in a restaurant. I mean, there's all these different things that you can try to do, but you've got to develop a way to live below your means. I remember back when I was younger, I'd get a raise at work and I go, oh wow, that means I can get a bigger car. We can go on that bigger trip. I mean, it was just an excuse to spend more. I mean, it was, in retrospect, it was kind of foolish, but that's one of the things that we're trying to do here at TFWP is get people, especially people younger on in their lives, to think about these long term. Number 5, eliminate debt. And of course, that's obvious. We spent many episodes in the first year of the TFWP talking about how to eliminate debt, different methods to eliminate debt. I mean, you really can't fire with debt. I mean, you just can't. And if you have a mortgage, you might want to consider paying it off. I mean, eliminating consumer debt with high interest rates is a no-brainer, but you might want to think about eliminating that mortgage or paying it off sooner. Certainly going to a 15-year loan so you pay less interest. But that's paying off the mortgage is more of a personal choice. Some people like the peace of mind of being liability free and it's worth it, where other people realize that they can save money in terms of an interest deduction on a primary residence, and they really like minimizing the taxes. So it's a personal decision. I'm kind of the mindset where I just like to see people eliminate all the debt so they don't have to worry about creating or including paying off a mortgage as part of the spend. But that's a personal decision. Number 6, leverage your income. And I think that means, keeping the spend in check, but also finding ways to cut costs. I think we've talked about in prior episodes, $1 saved is worth 2 earned, because then you don't have to pay the taxes on it and da-da-da-da-da-da. So that's something to think about. $1 saved is worth 2 earned. That's a way to leverage your income. But also, maybe you do a side hustle for a while. We talk about Uber and Lyft and some of these other things. Maybe you augment your income a little bit, or maybe during tax season you learn how to do tax returns and work for a company that does that, or you do tax returns on the side, something like that. But a side hustle, some type of a side hustle to boost your income and get you closer to being ready to retire. Number 7, you want to maximize the retirement accounts. And we've talked about this too, Brian. Oftentimes the best way to optimize savings is through retirement accounts. And we've talked about employee-sponsored retirement plans. We've talked about 401k plans. 401k plans we love especially because your employer's got a match. And of course, IRAs. IRAs are good too. And the only problem with maxing out and relying upon the IRAs and even the 401ks is when you retire, or when you are ready to start taking money out, I should say, you've got to be of a certain age, and you might not be, if you're going to fire, you might not be 59 and a half at that point, and you might not be able to access that money without a substantial penalty for early withdrawal. lately I've just been kind of thinking more and more about Roth IRAs. What a deal. I wish I had a thought about that years ago. You know, with the Roth IRA, you put in after-tax money. So you've already paid the tax, but then as it grows, it's tax-free. And I'm kind of liking that. And you can dip into the Roth IRA and take money out up to the amount of your contribution, tax-free if you ever need to get to that money. And certainly there are limits on, you know, who qualifies and how much you can put into a Roth IRA. But I think that especially as now the investments have, you know, gone up over the years, and the retirement accounts, I should say, I'd rather have a Roth IRA any day of the week than an IRA.
Yeah, definitely.
It's just more powerful. And you know, you think about it, back in the day, they were telling us, well, you want to maximize your IRAs because you don't want to pay taxes, and you're probably paying more tax now than you will later on in your life. True. But to have access to your money tax-free is pretty nice. Number 8, invest the money that's left over. And, you know, once you've filled up your retirement accounts, then you're going to move on to some kind of a brokerage account, at least in my opinion. Savings accounts are, you know, pay an awful low amount. And maybe you think about a brokerage account, you know, whether it's a Schwab or whether it's somewhere else. Not that you're necessarily going to buy an individual stocks. You know, maybe you want to think about low-cost index funds. Index funds are all-in-one investments that track a specific financial market, and they're designed to help you diversify and minimize your risk. I really like those kinds of retirement devices. Don't be in individual securities. It's too risky, and it takes time. If something happens, you can get wiped out. But if you've got a fund that somebody's put together and they're not taking a lot of money, a lot of these funds are computer programs almost at this point. Something certainly to think about. Number 9, always consider what if. Consider what if something in your plan goes wrong. What if something happens and you're getting close to that and you have to go back to work? Or what if the economy tanks? Or what if something happens in the world unexpected? Some terrorist group does something and it starts to put a kibosh on the economy. You always need to consider what if and have a plan B. I don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about potential worst case scenarios, but I think it's essential where you've got your livelihood on the line. And number 10, put your plan into action. You know, actually, once you've got this all laid out, if you're really going to pursue a fire path, put it into action. And don't start tomorrow. Start today. Start pursuing that path right away. Now, not to the detriment, in my opinion, of the present. You don't need to live in a closet and, you know, drink water and eat cardboard. But put the plan in place and still leave a little bit of the present to enjoy as well. I think that's one of the reasons that we were so drawn to the topic of fire last year, because the people who were being written about in the media were doing things that were probably more extreme than what we would have done.
Weren't there people that were going through restaurant trash?
That would be really, really extreme, right? Oh my goodness. I hear that restaurants throw out a lot of good food. I mean, the waste is phenomenal.
Or was it grocery stores?
I think it was grocery stores.
Grocery stores that they were.
Yeah. And looking for food. That's really extreme. I'll go a couple steps higher. You know, I'm still doing imperfect produce and digging it. At least there it's good food, it's quality food. It might be ugly food.
It's just ugly.
It's just ugly, you know. That potato looks like the backside of a bald guy's head or something. But that's one of the things that I like to do, and it forces us to make interesting and good tasting stuff at home and enjoy that, and it becomes an entertainment too. So those are the 10 things that I think that somebody needs to do if they're really going to pursue a fire path.
But isn't that the fire path is really just a more extreme version of everything that you've been talking about? You
know, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, really, a lot of this fire stuff talks about or feels like, you know, what we really try and promote here on TFWP. It's just that the fire path is so much more, you know, extreme. I think someone could retire at 25 if they wanted to live in their parents' basement and deliver newspapers, right? You'd have no overhead. You wouldn't need to travel. You'd have a bike. Although I don't even know if they do that anymore with newspapers.
Isn't that millennials?
Millennials, I guess. But, I think you're right. It is a TFW path, only much more extreme.
Yeah, to the nth degree.
Yeah. So there you have it. 10 ways to pursue the fire path. If you're up for it, get yourself in fighting shape and get going on that. This is Dave Hagan, and you're listening to the Financial Wellness Podcast.
You've been listening to the Financial Wellness Podcast, Dave's weekly message to keep you on your path to financial success. If you have a question that you would like Dave to answer on the podcast, go to thefinancialwellnesspodcast.com. You can leave an audio message with one click of a button or type your message into the question box. Either way, it's sent right to Dave's phone. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you receive the new episode notifications. Let's listen in now as Dave answers some emails.
We've got a handful of emails. Brian, why don't you hit me with a few?
All right, Dave, here's the first one from Emily, and she writes in, Dave, what are your thoughts on rent-to-own furniture stores or leasing furniture and electronics? Thanks, Emily.
Well, Emily, here's what I think. I'm not a fan, and I'll tell you why. First of all, we ought to be buying stuff for cash. We ought to be buying our stuff for cash. It makes us better consumers, and we're not going to be paying interest. Rent-to-own is really a hidden way of financing the acquisition of something. And I think if we're doing that, maybe we just shouldn't be acquiring that. I think that it's a far better thing to, look on Craigslist or look on places like that for some really good deals on some really great stuff and pay cash for that. Or if you've really got your eye on that sofa, save up the money and go out and buy that sofa and just take the depreciation on it, if you will. But really what these places are doing, and many times you'll find these places in less affluent parts of town, they are renting these items and then allowing you to purchase them at the end and applying the rental payments towards the purchase price. But the interest rate is really pretty high. And so not only would I not advise to buy something on time, but not to buy something on time with a high interest rate. So many of the places where you want to buy things now, I was going to say Sears, but I don't think they're around anymore. But some of these places, Best Buy or the furniture stores. I don't even know the names of the furniture stores anymore, but they all have their own credit card. And I guess if you're really going to do that, use their credit card. It's probably a lower interest rate than the rent-to-own. The rent-to-own, I think, is for people that have trouble with credit. So, I'm not really a fan. I remember back in the day, though, one of the first refrigerators that we ever bought was from a rent-to-own place. And they had some really good stuff that had come off of the term of the rent. And we were looking through about 30, 40 refrigerators till we found one that was really good. We got like a nice refrigerator for $200. So, those are people that decided not to buy it and gave it back. Hopefully their financial circumstance changed and to the better where they didn't need to buy that item. And they were able to turn it back and maybe get exactly what they wanted. We were able to find a pretty good refrigerator for $200. I'm kind of cheap from time to time on stuff like that, and especially when we were first putting our feet on the ground financially, and it was a good place to go and buy. So, I'm not really a fan. I would kind of stay away from that, Emily. I don't know that that's what you wanted to hear, but I think that's what's going on there. And my advice would be to stay away from that. Like I said, Craigslist, or if you must, finance it through a store's credit card, or best yet, pay cash. Stay away from those places. All right. We got another email, Brian?
Yeah, we got one more here from Scott. Dave, the stock market recently closed at over 29,000. What's going on? Love the podcast. Thanks.
Well, let me tell you, I'm not going to get into investment advice because that could cost me money. People could say, you gave me bad advice, and I don't have an investment licensure or anything like that. But I'm not going to provide any investment advice. But how about some perspective? Here's some interesting things. We're in our 10th year of economic recovery. Who would have thought that we would have 10 years of good economic performance? You know, and 10 years ago, as a country, we were almost out of business. And people were asking me, should I take my money out of the bank? And I was saying, well, do you think the government's going to fail? Because the government backs the banks, at least for the first portion of people's money. And they said, well, yeah, should I take my money out of the bank? The fact that people thought that our economic problems were so severe could have caused us to go deeper and deeper into problems. You know, the average recovery is about 8 years, and so we're really past what a normal average recovery might be. So maybe this recovery is a little long in the tooth. Something for you to think about. Another thing, the market went up 29% last year. I mean, that's a phenomenal year. That's just a great year. There's people skipping up and down Wall Street. But the average over, 80 years or 90 years is maybe 12%. So you're not going to see 29% years very often. The average is much less. And of course, in some years, there have been huge losses. Another thing to think about, election years are typically pretty good. An existing government wants to stay in power, and so they do things to try and keep the economy good. Although the current president doesn't seem to have a lot of sway on the current chairman of the Fed. In fact, it doesn't seem like they're even that friendly. So I don't know what could happen there. So there's no promises, but typically election years tend to have pretty good economies, So it's hard to tell exactly what's going on. Who would have thought that the recovery would last this long? Who would have thought that we'd have a almost 30% increase in value last year, that the markets would go up? Who knows what's going to happen during this election year? But I think the best way to be protected with these kinds of things is to have a well-diversified portfolio. And by that I mean some index funds, maybe you've got some bonds, but have a well-diversified portfolio. And especially if you're in your middle years, a good diversified portfolio is good, because if something bad happens, you've got some years to earn it back. If you're in those years just coming up to retirement, well, maybe it's best to be a little more cash. Maybe it's best to have a little more risk. Those are the kinds of issues that you can talk to an investment counselor about. But the rally has been phenomenal. It's been a great 10 years. But how long it's going to go on is anybody's guess. I remember talking to a fella just not more than 4 months ago, and he was saying, oh, it's coming in November of 2019. And we all went, wow, it's going to fall in 2019, late 2019. Didn't happen. Didn't happen. So talk to your investment counselor, have a well-diversified portfolio, and we will all sit back and just watch in amazement as the market continues to do whatever it does. It's going to be Brian and Dave and Scott standing back and watching and going, wow, who would have thought whatever's going to happen. All right, that's a wrap. Tune in next week. We're going to talk about the skills that companies need most in 2020. We're going to talk about a new concept called soft skills, or at least a new concept to me. So we're going to talk about soft skills and hard skills. Should be interesting. That'll be next week on the Financial Wellness Podcast.
You've been listening to the Financial Wellness Podcast, Dave's weekly message to keep you on your path to financial success. If you have a question that you would like Dave to answer on the podcast, go to thefinancialwellnesspodcast.com. You can leave an audio message with one click of a button, or type your message into the question box. Either way, it's sent right to Dave's phone. Remember, Dave will randomly draw from the submitted questions and pick the winner of a free 1-hour personal conversation with Dave to help you achieve your financial goals. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you receive the new episode notifications, or share the podcast via the app with your family and friends. This is your announcer, Nick Appel, wishing you every financial success.